welcome to the deep dive. Today we are wading into what might be the most complex, yet, well, most essential, intellectual battleground of our era.
You mean the war over seeds?
Exactly, the war over the seeds that feed the world. Our mission here is to try and navigate this really confusing array of overlapping intellectual property regimes.
Yeah, the ones that currently govern living organisms. It's a tangle.
It really is. And we're looking at a legal tangle that affects pretty much everyone, from huge multinational agrochemical giants all the way down to, a single home gardener saving some heirloom beans.
And it's not just complex, it's critically urgent. I mean, our sources repeatedly stress this. The entire global food system is potentially at risk because of how industrial seed companies have, well, chosen to prioritize certain traits.
Right, the focus has been so heavily on maximizing production. Things like uniformity, super high yield, and of course, resistance to their own agrochemicals.
Traits that fit that large-scale monoculture model perfectly, like a glove.
But they've done this, and this is the key point, at the expense of really crucial traits we need now more than ever for resilience.
Things like low resource use, adaptation to specific regions, and just fundamental genetic diversity.
And with the climate destabilizing so rapidly.
Exactly. That narrowing of the genetic base, it presents this massive, almost existential risk. It really limits the adaptive capacity of our staple crops. We're painting ourselves into a corner, genetically speaking.
What stands out to me is just the sheer level of engagement this topic inspires, even way outside the usual legal or agricultural circles.
Yeah.
Think about that virtual listening session on seed commons and ownership back in January 2020.
Oh, I remember hearing about that. Huge turnout. Right.
Over 150 attendees. And the range was incredible: university breeders, independent seed company owners, all the way down to home gardeners.
Wow. That kind of attendance, I mean, that's a powerful testament, isn't it? It shows the widespread confusion, but also, maybe more importantly, this shared realization that the current system is kind of broken.
Totally. People from seemingly opposite ends of the seed world, all united by this desire for systems that actually protect diversity and resilience.
Not just corporate monopolies. And I think to really understand the fight today, we have to look back. We need to dig into the legal history, how a natural reproducing organism somehow became defined as, well, corporate property.
It's a long history, but the legal part is relatively recent.
That's right. For, over 10,000 years, plant breeding was this communal, continuous process. It was built on open exchange, regional specialization. People just did it.
And intellectual property rights, IPR, applied to seeds. That's less than a century old.
Barely. And federal policies, well, they've been struggling constantly to keep pace with how fast breeding advancements have been happening. It's like they're always one step behind.
And the government's initial involvement before IPR really took hold, it was actually the complete opposite of restriction, wasn't it? It was all about distribution.
Absolutely. Before the 1930 Plant Patent Act, the USPTO, that's the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, their job included collecting and sending out free seed.
Free seed.
To farmers.
To farmers all across the country. And farmers would take these seeds and, through careful observation, selection over generations, they'd develop these regionally adapted, improved varieties, stuff perfectly suited to their local microclimates, their soil conditions.
So it was this cycle of free exchange, continuous public improvement.
Exactly. That was the norm.
So that spirit, that open and free seed trade, which was basically the global standard for millennia, it was consciously stopped, curtailed.
It was. It was a conscious and frankly successful campaign, driven largely by conservative lawmakers and, crucially, the American Seed Trade Association, ASTA.
Ah, the industry group.
They lobbied hard. They wanted to shift plant breeding away from being a publicly supported science, the kind that was happening in land-grant universities, and make it a function of private industry.
And they saw the free seed program as a threat.
Fundamentally, they saw it as completely antithetical to the interests of the growing commercial seed market. You can't sell seeds if the government's giving them away for free, right? Makes sense from their perspective. And this push eventually led to the establishment of these three major and often kind of contradictory pillars of seed IPR in the U.S. legal system.
Correct. So the first attempt to really commodify seeds legally was the Plant Patent Act, the PPA, back in 1930.
And this was narrow at first.
Very narrow. It only covered plants that reproduce asexually. So things reproduced through cloning, cuttings, grafting. Think roses, some fruit trees, certain berries.
Okay, why only asexual? Why leave out the big staples like corn and wheat?
Well, the thinking at the patent office back then was that seeds from sexually reproduced crops like corn or wheat couldn't reliably produce a stable, uniform variety generation after generation.
Ah, the patent needs consistency.
Yeah.
An invention needs to be predictable.
Exactly. If a seed didn't come true to type reliably, they figured it couldn't be patented as a distinct invention. But, that belief was already being challenged by advances in conventional breeding.
Which kind of forced the issue and led to the next legal framework.
Indeed. ASTA kept pushing, kept lobbying, and that resulted in the second pillar, the Plant Variety Protection Act, or PVPA, in 1970.
And this was the big one.
This was the major shift. It granted 20 years of exclusive marketing rights to the developer of a sexually reproducing plant. So now we're talking corn, soybeans, wheat, as long as the variety met these criteria. It had to be new, distinct, uniform, and stable.
So basically acknowledging that modern breeding could guarantee consistency now.
Right. But the PVPA, and this is really important, when Congress actually passed it, they specifically structured it to protect that traditional breeding system. They built in safeguards.
The exemption.
Yes, absolutely critical. Congress included two specific non-negotiable exemptions. First, the farmer's exemption. That allowed farmers to save seeds from varieties protected under the PVPA, but only for their own on-farm use.
Okay, so saving seed was still allowed for personal use.
Yes, and second, the breeder's exemption. This allowed other breeders to buy protected seeds and use them for research, specifically to breed new varieties.
So it kept the door open for innovation, for continuous improvement.
That was Congress's clear intent. It was their way of preserving that millennial system of open exchange and improvement within the framework of a limited commercial market. They tried to strike a balance.
Okay, so if Congress went to such lengths to protect those traditions with the PVPA, where did it all go wrong? How did we end up with the system we have now, which seems so much more restrictive?
Well, that takes us to the third and honestly the most disruptive pillar, the utility patent overreach.
Okay.
And this story really kicks off in 1980 with a landmark Supreme Court case, Diamond v. Chakrabarty.
I've heard of that one. That was about bacteria, right?
Exactly. It ruled that basically anything man-made under the sun was eligible for a patent. The case itself was about genetically engineered microorganisms, but it just opened the floodgates.
But hang on, plants were already covered, specifically by the PPA and the PVPA. How did a court ruling on microbes end up applying to, say, a corn plant?
That happened just a few years later in 1985 with a case called Ex parte Hibbard. This ruling basically said that a plant breeder could apply for a general utility patent on a plant variety.
Even the sexually reproducing crops Congress meant to be under the PVPA.
Even those. Corn, soybeans, you name it. This was a radical step, a complete circumvention of what Congress had intended with the PVPA and its specific exemptions.
So, if that ruling seemed to clearly contradict Congress's intent in the PVPA, how did it stick? Why did the legal system allow it? What was the justification?
Well, the courts essentially interpreted the language of the general patent law, the one covering inventions like machines, as being broad enough to include life forms, especially after Chakrabarty established that life could be patented.
So they argued that since Congress hadn't explicitly forbidden using utility patents for plants in the PVPA,
it was therefore permissible. It's a bit of legal gymnastics, frankly, and the result was catastrophic for the public domain idea.
Why catastrophic?
Because a utility patent, unlike a PVP certificate, expressly denies both the farmer's right to save seeds and the breeder's exemption for research.
Whoa. So it allows the patent holder to completely prevent anyone else from using their patented seeds for saving or even for breeding something new.
Total control. It essentially allows for the creation of a private monopoly over genetic material that Congress had tried very hard to keep, at least partially, in the public commons. It fundamentally rewrote the rules.
And we can't really talk about this legal landscape, this idea of the public domain, without facing the colonial foundation of where a lot of this germplasm came from in the first place.
You absolutely cannot. We have to look at the origin of what the U.S. legal system even defined as the public domain.
You mean the institutions like the land-grant universities that were supposed to serve the public good?
Precisely. The LGU system, intended as the heart of public agricultural science, established by the Morrill Act of 1862, the Hatch Act of 1887, we have to acknowledge the system was funded by the violent dispossession of nearly 11 million acres of indigenous land.
Land that was taken and then sold off to fund these agricultural colleges.
Yes. So the very resources, the land itself, the capacity for research were founded on stolen resources and often displaced indigenous knowledge systems.
And that pattern of acquisition, of taking, continued beyond U.S. borders.
Oh, globally. The U.S. government initiated huge programs to acquire seeds and plants from all over the world. This eventually led to the National Plant Germplasm System, the MPGS, and its online database,
Jurin, right, the gene bank.
Since 1898, the U.S. has acquired over 600,000 different plant accessions, seeds from growers everywhere. Many of these varieties were the result of thousands of years of continuous selection, traditional breeding by indigenous or local communities.
And through this historical process, often colonial,
They were acquired, brought back, and then essentially claimed as belonging to the public domain, ready for use by, well, mainly Western researchers.
which sets up this critical paradox that breeders and activists talk about today, the Grin paradox.
Understanding the Grin paradox is vital. Look, the MPGS and the DRIN database are undeniably crucial resources. They hold a massive amount of global genetic diversity, and access is free for research or education. Public breeders can use this incredible wealth of material.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
So what's the paradox?
The paradox is this. The new varieties that result from breeding projects using those freely accessed DRIN seeds, those new varieties can then be patented under the utility patent system we just discussed.
So the system takes diversity developed over millennia by farmers globally, calls it public domain, makes it free to access.
And then allows a private corporation or even a university acting like one to put a legal lock, a utility patent, on the improvement derived from that public resource.
It effectively closes the door again. The benefits flowing from that public resource get privatized.
That's the crux. It closes off the derived benefits behind this, well, this colonial process that acquired the resources in the first place. It disregards the intellectual contribution, the history, the context of the communities where these seeds originated. It makes the public domain a one-way street, really benefiting those with the resources to navigate the patent system.
Which brings us squarely to the problems with the utility patent system itself, both technically and ethically. Okay, let's really unpack this core issue. Why plants just fundamentally do not fit the mold of a utility patent. A system designed for, what? Machines. Chemical compounds.
The mismatch is just profound. Conceptually, biologically, think about the basic idea of a patent. It assumes you've got a distinct, static invention, something engineered from scratch.
Right, like building a better mousetrap.
Exactly. Plants just aren't inventions in that sense. They're living organisms. They're the results of millions of years of evolution, constant adaptation to their environment.
Even with modern genetic engineering, you're still working with the organism's existing biology, its genome. You're not creating life from a vacuum.
Precisely. And that gets to the second big issue, reproduction. Unlike a car or a computer, which needs factories, capital, effort to make copies,
Seeds just grow.
plants reproduce naturally, often prolifically. One single seed can become thousands in a generation or two. This inherent ability to multiply just defies the whole point of the patent system, doesn't it? Which is to restrict reproduction to the originator to ensure control and profit.
And then there's that legal requirement for enabling disclosure. You know, if I patent a machine, I have to describe it well enough so someone skilled in the art could theoretically build it once the patent expires.
Right, it's supposed to eventually enrich the public knowledge base.
But with patented seeds, our sources say companies often make that really difficult. They obscure the breeding history, the parent lines.
Yeah, they absolutely do. It's a common tactic. Companies frequently cite proprietary inbred lines or use codes and numbers instead of actual names for the parent varieties.
It's hard to know what went into it.
Very hard. Without a clear description that truly enables others to understand the source or potentially use the material later, the patented germplasm gets siloed off. It's walled off from the rest of the seed pool. And that's a massive problem for long-term resilience. You need that exchange of genetic material. You can't breed effectively with what you can't fully see or access.
And this secrecy, this control, leads us directly into the really thorny ethical issue of biopiracy.
Yes, biopiracy is basically the privatization and expropriation of indigenous knowledge and resources using these Western IPR mechanisms.
It's like a modern form of colonialism, enforced through the legal system.
That's exactly how many see it. It rewards only a very narrow definition of innovation, the kind that fits neatly into Western legal boxes, while completely ignoring or dismissing the thousands of years of intellectual labor, observation, conservation and selection performed by traditional communities.
We hear about the famous examples, right, like basmati rice.
Yeah, patents filed on basmati rice, which is indigenous to the Himalayas,
Yeah.
or patents on neem tree extracts used as a natural pesticide in Indian agriculture for millennia. Even if these patents are eventually challenged and overturned, the process itself disrupts. It restricts the ability of the original peoples to control and benefit from their own ancestral resources and knowledge.
And this isn't just an international issue fought over treaties. It happens domestically, too. You mentioned a case involving wild rice.
Right. Back in 1999, a company called NorCal Inc. actually got a patent on an improved variety of wild rice. Wild rice, mannamin, is a sacred staple food for the Ojibwe people in Minnesota and the Great Lakes region.
So patenting it is seen as a direct threat to their food sovereignty.
Absolutely. Indigenous activists see this as undermining their control over their own food systems. The big fear is cross-contamination. If patented traits, even conventionally bred ones, drift via pollen into their traditional wild rice stands.
It creates the legal potential for the company to claim infringement, to try and stop the Ojibwe from their traditional harvest.
That's the fear. It hasn't necessarily happened widely in that specific case, but the potential is there. Utility patents in this context become a tool to legally reinforce historical oppression, to essentially enforce a form of trespass on indigenous resources.
Wow. Now, putting aside the really deep ethical and biological problems for a moment, sometimes patents seem to be sought for purely strategic reasons, like weapons in a corporate war.
That's absolutely right. Sometimes it's straightforward. Companies admit they get patents just to boost the value of their portfolio for shareholders. Makes the company look more valuable, maybe more attractive for a merger or acquisition.
A numbers game.
Pretty much. But other times, they're used as these sophisticated bargaining chips. We saw this really clearly in the lettuce market example you brought up, involving Enza Zayden and Rick Swan.
Right, the forced trade-off over disease resistance trade.
Exactly. Enza Zayden really needed access to Rick Swan's patent for resistance to the Nasonovia aphid to stay competitive in the huge California lettuce market. Meanwhile, Rick Swan needed Enza Zayden's patent for resistance to a specific type of downy mildew.
So they basically had to swap patents.
They ended up cross-licensing. But think about what that means. This exchange, this trade, it happened between two massive companies with deep pockets for legal fees and big patent portfolios. It didn't really promote public innovation, did it?
No, it just consolidated power between the big players.
It forced the major players to trade access, effectively shutting out smaller breeders, public institutions, anyone who didn't have the resources or a valuable patent portfolio to bring to the negotiating table.
And this overwhelming patent power, it's not just theoretical, it's backed up by serious litigation resources. That creates this massive coercive threat, even if someone infringes by accident.
Oh, the threat is huge, and it's very real. Let's look at some numbers. As far back as 2003, Monsanto reportedly had a dedicated department, 75 employees, a budget of $10 million a year.
Wait, 75 people and $10 million. Not for legal defense, but purely to investigate and prosecute patent infringement.
That was the reported purpose. It wasn't just about defending their patents. It was an offensive enforcement unit. It shows you exactly where the power dynamic lies and what the company prioritized. Aggressive enforcement.
And the impact of that enforcement.
Staggering. The Center for Food Safety compiled data showing that by December 2012, Monsanto alone had filed 142 lawsuits alleging seed patent infringement. These suits involved 410 farmers and 56 small farm businesses across 27 states.
And the damages awarded.
Over $23 million in total awarded damages by that point. And that's just one company over a specific period.
And these companies don't just go after the farmers directly, do they? The litigation seems aimed at crippling the whole support infrastructure for seed saving.
That's a key tactic. Think about the story of Mopar, the seed cleaner in Indiana.
Right, he wasn't even a farmer infringing, he just cleaned seeds.
Exactly. He was sued for aiding and abetting infringement, simply because he provided a service cleaning saved seeds for his farmer customers. The lawsuit forced him into this crippling settlement. He ended up losing 95% of his business because farmers became terrified.
Terrified that just using his services would put a target on their backs.
Precisely. It shows how the control extends far beyond the direct user of the seed. It creates this chilling effect throughout the entire local agricultural community.
And maybe the most insidious part is the risk for the inadvertent infringer. Pollen drifts, right? Genetic drift is just a natural process.
It is, and farmers are genuinely worried, especially organic farmers or those stewarding culturally important varieties, about contamination from nearby fields growing patented, maybe genetically engineered crops.
If some patented pollen blows onto your field and pollinates your crop, could you be liable?
Well, technically, companies like Bayer, formerly Monsanto, say they won't sue for trace amounts of accidental GE contamination. But the burden of preventing that contamination, the testing, the buffer zones, it still creates huge headaches and costs for the farmer who doesn't want the patented trait.
And the fear is still there.
The fear is absolutely there, and it's been reinforced by 2 decades of court cases, like the famous Percy Schmeiser case in Canada, which consistently affirmed the power of the patent holder, even in cases of suspected drift. This fear has successfully dissuaded many conventional farmers from saving seed altogether.
It's easier and safer just to buy new seed every year than risk a lawsuit.
For many, yes. If you're worried that the wind blowing the wrong way could land you in court, you just stop saving seed. The power dynamic has been completely shifted in favor of the corporation holding the patent.
Okay, so if the utility patent system represents this peak of corporate control and restriction, the whole conversation about seed access isn't complete without tackling what you called the hybrid conundrum.
Right, because hybrid seeds often get lumped in, sometimes mistakenly, with GMOs as this sort of generic symbol of corporate, high-input industrial agriculture.
There's a lot of confusion there.
There is, and some of it is, well, historically constructed, maybe even deliberately. We really need to start by clarifying the actual technical difference between an F1 hybrid seed and an open-pollinated, or OP, seed.
Okay, let's start with the F1 hybrids, the ones known for yield.
Right. F1 hybrids are the first-generation offspring from a controlled cross between 2 distinct, highly uniform, inbred parent lines.
Inbred lines, meaning they're very genetically uniform.
Extremely uniform. And when you cross these 2 specific inbred lines, that first generation, the F1, benefits from something breeders call hybrid vigor or heterosis.
That's the explosive growth and yield?
That's the explosive growth, the super high yields, the impressive uniformity. All the plants look and mature the same. That's the upside. That's why they became so popular commercially.
Okay, so what's the drawback?
The major drawback is purely biological. If you save the seed produced by that F1 plant, that seed is the F2 generation and plant it the next year.
It doesn't work the same.
It doesn't come true to type. All those desirable traits you saw in the F1, the high yield, the uniformity they segregate out randomly in the F2 generation.
So you get a messy, unpredictable mix of plants.
Exactly. You'll get huge variation in height, yield, maturity time. It's basically useless for reliable commercial production. And because of that,
Farmers have to buy new F1 seed every single year. Mandatory annual dependency.
that's the core business model. It's a powerful form of built-in biological intellectual property protection, predating patents even. Companies like Pioneer built their business on this model back in the 1930s.
Okay, so that's F1 hybrids. Compare that to open-pollinated or OP seeds.
OP seeds are pollinated naturally by wind, insects, whatever is around. They are by nature genetically diverse, they're adaptable, and crucially, they do reliably come true to type, mostly.
Meaning you can save the seed.
You can save the seed, replant it, and get a crop that looks very similar to the parent generation. And this allows farmers not only to save seed, but also to actively adapt that variety to their specific local conditions over successive seasons through selection.
These are often the heirloom varieties the land races people cherish.
Often, yes. The ones known for unique histories, flavors, resilience in specific environments.
It's fascinating then how you said the term hybrid itself became almost weaponized rhetorically, used to signify dependency, even for seeds that weren't technically F1 hybrids.
Yeah, this linguistic shift really took off in the 1970s, especially among critics of industrial agriculture. They started grouping F1 hybrids together with the new semi-dwarf wheat and rice varieties that were central to the Green Revolution.
But those Green Revolution varieties, the ones that dramatically increased yields in places like India and Mexico, they weren't F1s.
No, they were stable, open-pollinated varieties. You could theoretically save the seed from them, but critics often called them hybrids anyway.
Why? To deliberately associate them with.
With the restrictions on farmer seed saving inherent in F1s, and with the whole package of what they saw as capitalist agro-industry, the high inputs, the chemicals, the corporate control, the word hybrid became less a technical description and more a negative signifier for that whole system.
And that history probably contributes to the confusion we still see today, where people assume any patented seed must also be genetically engineered. or a hybrid.
Absolutely. There's this persistent hybrid GMO confusion. People often think all patented seeds are GE, but as we've discussed, many utility patents are granted for traits developed through purely traditional breeding methods, like a specific fruit color or resistance to a certain disease. It has nothing to do with genetic engineering directly.
So GE just made it easier to claim novelty for patents.
Genetic engineering definitely accelerated the process of making patent claims and asserting control over germplasm, partly because demonstrating the required novelty and non-obviousness for a utility patent was often clearer with a specific inserted gene.
Okay. To really bring home the profound societal impact of this F1 hybrid dependency, especially on vulnerable communities, we need to look at that case study. The hybrid rice dilemma in Jharkhand, India.
Yes, this is a region struggling intensely with poverty and food security. And the promise dangled by the big seed companies Syngenta, DuPont, Bayer is massive yield increases.
How much higher?
They promote their specific hybrid rice varieties as yielding 15 to 20% higher than even the traditional high-yielding varieties farmers might have used before.
That's incredibly tempting for a farmer struggling to feed their family.
Incredibly seductive. Who wouldn't want a 20% boost in their main food crop?
But what's the actual cost? What's the catch?
The cost is steep, and it's multi-layered. First, the hybrid seed itself is expensive. Second, it demands heavy inputs, huge amounts of chemical fertilizers and pesticides to achieve those promised yields.
Which costs more money and potentially locks farmers into debt cycles.
Exactly, and it creates that dependency we talked about.
Right.
The data from Jharkhand is stark. Just 5 years prior to the study, nearly 75% of farmers in the area were saving their own rice seed.
And now?
That number had plummeted to just 34%. They're locked into buying seed, buying inputs every single year.
What about the long-term picture for these farmers? Does the high yield consistently deliver?
Well, that's the thing. It seems incredibly risky. The study found that 75% of the farmers surveyed actually anticipated getting less yield in the long run. They described the performance of hybrids as very uneven, kind of all or nothing.
Meaning a great harvest one year, but maybe a total failure the next?
Precisely. One bad year, one season where the specific conditions don't suit that particular hybrid or they can't afford the inputs and the crop could fail completely. That's incredibly high risk for a smallholder farmer who depends on that harvest to survive.
And beyond just the yield numbers, what about quality of life? Basic food security?
This is where the trade-offs become really apparent. Traditional rice varieties have critical advantages for food security that the hybrids completely lack.
Like taste.
Storage. Both. Farmers overwhelmingly said traditional rice tastes better. 70% felt it made them feel strong, likely referring to satiety or nutrition. And crucially, traditional rice keeps longer. It can be stored for extended periods, which is vital for getting through lean times or droughts.
And cooked traditional rice can be kept.
Yes, they mentioned cooked traditional rice can often be eaten the next day. Hybrid rice, by contrast, spoils quickly. It has to be consumed fast. And because of that, and the need for cash to pay for the seeds and inputs.
The hybrid rice is mostly grown for the cash market, not to eat themselves.
Primarily, they grow it to sell, hoping to pay off the debts incurred buying the hybrid system in the first place. It doesn't contribute directly to household food security in the same way traditional rice does.
And the environmental costs?
Yeah.
Are they noticeable?
Measurable and devastating, according to the farmers. Over 76% reported a bad effect on their soil health from the intensive cultivation and chemical use. Almost 20% fear the damage might be permanent.
Wow.
And maybe even more alarming, almost 98% reported a loss of fish in their paddy fields. Fish in rice paddies are a traditional source of protein and income in many parts of Asia. Their disappearance points to severe ecological disruption from the required heavy chemical use.
So they're essentially trading long-term soil health and local biodiversity for these temporary risky yield increases.
That appears to be the trade-off, yes. And it seems the companies involved are focused mainly on driving sales and locking in that dependency, regardless of the long-term consequences for the farmers or the environment.
What are the market dynamics like? How do farmers even choose?
It's predatory and confusing. Farmers reported feeling overwhelmed by the sheer number of new companies and seed varieties flooding the market. One farmer literally said, "Our heads are spinning."
And they rely on local dealers.
Heavily. Seed dealers are often their main source of information, but also, crucially, their main source of credit. So they're tied to the dealer. And the companies use aggressive promotions. Pioneer was mentioned offering gifts like umbrellas, even silver or gold-plated coins, as incentives to buy their seed.
But what happens if the expensive hybrid seed fails? Is there any recourse?
Apparently not. The farmers reported that if the seed fails to perform, no compensation is offered by the company. And to make matters worse, the seed packets are often labeled only in English, a language neither the farmers nor even many local dealers can read.
So they have to rely entirely on the sales pitch from the company agent or the dealer.
Completely. It's a system ripe for exploitation. This situation in Sharkhand, while it's geographically distant, it really crystallizes the global systemic failure that the utility patent overreach in the U.S. helped enable. High cost, high risk, high input, high dependency. A system really only manageable by the largest, most capitalized, most risk-tolerant players.
Okay, so if utility patents are a major part of the problem, and F1 hybrid dependency is often the consequence, where do growers turn? Especially those who value diversity, who want open exchange. There must be other tools, right? An ethical toolkit?
Thankfully, yes. A viable toolkit does exist, and it's growing. It focuses on alternatives that try to adhere to principles of shared benefit, long-term stewardship, and sustained diversity. Let's start by going back to the Plant Variety Protection PVP certificate.
The one Congress originally intended for sexually reproducing plants before ex parte Hibbert.
Exactly. This is often seen as a crucial middle ground, a compromise.
Why a middle ground? Because it offers some market protection but not total lockdown.
Precisely. A PVP certificate grants the breeder a 20-year exclusive marketing period that gives them crucial time and opportunity to recoup the significant costs of breeding work. But, and this is the key difference from a utility patent, the PVP retains both the farmer's exemption for saving seed for on-farm use and the breeder's exemption for using the variety in research.
So it keeps the door open for continued improvement and adaptation, preserves that engine.
It does. It tries to balance commercial viability with the need for an open commons for future breeding.
And we have a really good example of a small company grappling with this choice, right? Earthworks Seeds and their Selene bean.
Yes, the Selene purple wax bean. Jason Cavatorta, the founder, and his team, they invested over 6 years and estimated, over $500,000 developing this unique bean.
That's a huge investment for a small company, especially for beans.
Especially for beans. Because beans are open-pollinated, mostly self-pollinating, they're incredibly easy for anyone to save and reproduce. Cavatorta realized that without some kind of protection, anyone could just buy their Selene beans, grow them out, scale up production, and compete purely on price.
And Earthworks Seeds would never recoup their development costs.
Exactly. Especially on a crop like beans where the profit margins are already notoriously thin. So they decided to pursue a PVP certificate.
But they framed it as a business necessity, not a desire for monopoly.
Very much so. It was presented as a practical approach to ensure the company's sustainability. John Hart, the breeder, also pointed out other practical benefits of the PVP. It offers important protections against certain international trade shenanigans.
Like preventing export and re-import.
Right. It prevents someone from exporting the protected seed, bulking it up cheaply elsewhere, and then re-importing it to sell in the U.S., undercutting the original breeder. For Earthworks Seeds, the PVP was necessary to operate as a serious company in a really competitive market while still fundamentally keeping the core genetics available for other breeders to use in their research.
They even called it a silent collaboration, didn't they? Allowing others to cross with their bean.
Yeah, acknowledging that future innovation builds on past work. The PVP allows that. The utility patent often doesn't.
Okay, so PVP is one tool. What about protecting the name and the reputation of a variety rather than the genetics themselves?
That's where trademarks come in. A trademark protects the brand name associated with a product, not the underlying biological material.
This seems useful for things like land races, which might not be uniform enough for a PVP.
Exactly. A great example is Timeless Seeds and their black belugi lentils. They look strikingly like caviar, hence the name.
And they needed that distinctive name to stand out, especially in Montana where lentils aren't the main crop.
Precisely. Dave Oyen, the co-founder, explained that once the name Black Beluga gained some market traction, other people inevitably started using it for lentils that weren't theirs, maybe weren't even the same quality.
So the trademark was about protecting their niche, their market identity.
Yes, and guaranteeing the integrity and quality associated with their growers and their specific lentil. If someone else sold inferior lentils under the catchy Black Beluga name, it would damage the reputation Timeless Seeds had worked hard to build.
But defending a trademark, it's not a simple one-time thing, is it? It sounds like it requires ongoing effort.
It's absolutely an incremental and constant legal process. Timeless Seeds had to send out numerous cease and desist letters. They eventually had to hire an attorney and really build up the credibility of their claim against smaller infringers before they could successfully defend the trademark against a big retailer like Target.
You snooze, you lose, basically.
Pretty much, you have to actively defend your trademark or you risk it becoming generic and therefore void. They even ran into trouble trying to trademark it in Europe because they hadn't defended it consistently enough early on.
And trademarks can also be used strategically to define an entirely new crop, right? Like currency.
Kernza is a fantastic example of strategic IPR layering. The Land Institute, which developed Kernza perennial grain, first registered the specific cultivar in the Journal of Plant Registrations.
Why do that first?
That establishes prior art. It's a form of defensive publication, which we should talk more about. It basically puts the description out there publicly, making it much harder, if not impossible, for someone else to later claim novelty and get a patent on it.
Okay, so defensive publication first, then the trademark.
Then they needed the trademark, Guernsey, as Tessa Peters from the Land Institute explained. If you're dealing with an established crop like wheat, everyone knows what wheat is. You can't just sell a bag of sand and call it wheat.
Right.
But for something entirely new like Kernza, you need some way to define what it is to set quality standards. The trademark knows that.
And the trademark does more than just define quality. It helps them enforce their social mission, too.
Yes, this is really innovative. The Land Institute sells Kernza grain through a licensing program. Growers who want to use the Kernza trademark have to agree to certain conditions, like participating in an identity preserve program.
And this licensing agreement lets the Land Institute enforce things beyond just genetics.
Exactly. Things that formal patents or PVPs legally cannot require. For instance, they can build requirements into the license related to sustainability, mandating specific farm management plans, crop rotations, or even diversity, equity, and inclusion standards for the growers. It's using the trademark as a tool for social and ecological goals.
So we've got PVPs, trademarks, defensive publication. What other tools are in this ethical toolkit, especially for keeping seeds in the public domain or protecting culturally important ones?
Well, defensive publication itself is critical. Beyond just registering in a journal, it means systematically documenting a variety, its traits, its lineage, in any widely disseminated physical document, a catalog, a report, a website.
So just getting the information out there publicly.
Yes. By establishing that prior art clearly and publicly, you effectively invalidate any future patent application someone might try to file that claims novelty for that same variety or trait. It's a proactive defense of the commons.
And for protecting those culturally sensitive seeds, especially indigenous land races, you mentioned material transfer agreements or MTAs.
MTAs are really important, especially in research collaborations. They are basically contracts signed between two parties when seeds or other biological materials are transferred. The MTA spells out exactly how the material can be used and, crucially, what cannot be done with it.
Like prohibiting patenting.
Exactly. An MTA can explicitly forbid the recipient from applying for patents on the material or derivatives. This is vital for protecting culturally significant seeds when they're shared, say, with a university researcher. It helps prevent biopiracy by establishing clear terms before the material changes hands. It aligns with international agreements, too, like the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing.
So it sets up a legal framework based on agreement rather than relying on the patent system itself.
Right. It helps the community or originating institution lay a clear legal claim and set conditions for use before sharing, which can also serve as proof of prior art if someone later tries to ignore the agreement and patent anyway.
Ultimately, though, beyond these legal tools, many organic and small-scale growers, they still rely heavily on just community, a shared ethic, a moral agreement about how seeds should be exchanged.
That community ethic has been the backbone for a long time. But even that is changing. There's a growing recognition that trust alone isn't always enough, especially as the seed sector gets more competitive and, frankly, litigious. People are realizing they need clearer understandings, maybe even formal contracts within the community, to deter the bad actors that the current restrictive IPR system tends to create or empower.
So the community is trying to formalize its own rules.
Exactly. And research into these efforts has identified about 4 key guiding principles that seem to be emerging from these discussions. Think of them as a blueprint for a more resilient, ethical seed system that prioritizes shared goals over restriction.
Okay, let's delve into those 4 principles, because they really sound like the foundation for a different kind of future for seeds.
The first one is ethical recognition and attribution. This is all about proper naming and, really importantly, a meticulous documentation of a seed's full lineage.
Acknowledging everyone who contributed.
Everyone. Indigenous growers, public breeders, farmer selectors, the whole history. This isn't just about giving credit, it's about maintaining the quality, the integrity, and the story of the seed.
And you mentioned this recognition is often valued even more than money or royalties.
For many traditional seed stewards, absolutely. The perpetuation of the seed story, its connection to place, its cultural significance, and ensuring its public integrity that's often seen as the core value. Keeping that lineage clear ensures future generations understand the history and the potential locked within that seed.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second principle?
The second is ethical compensation.
Yeah.
And this one is complex because needs and philosophies vary widely.
Some people don't want any payment. They want seeds to be free.
Some absolutely believe seeds should remain entirely free, part of the commons, no strings attached. But others, especially small breeders or farmers doing intensive stewardship work, they need some form of compensation to stay financially viable to continue their labor.
So how do you balance that?
One emerging alternative to restrictive IPR is the idea of voluntary royalties. Maybe a standard suggestion like 10% of sales paid back to the breeder or the community that developed the variety. It's a way to maintain openness while still acknowledging and supporting the labor involved.
Interesting. Principle number 3.
Third is transparency along the seed value chain. There is just huge and I think justifiable frustration among growers about how unclear and hidden IPR restrictions often are.
You buy a packet of seed and you have no idea if it's patented or PVP'd.
Exactly. Growers are calling for some kind of public, easily accessible platform, maybe a database that clearly shows which varieties are restricted, how, and by whom. Failing that, the demand is simple. Disclose IPR information clearly right on the seed packaging or in the catalogs. That is far from standard practice now.
Because the danger is real. You could have patented seed in your hand, maybe bought from a small local distributor who didn't pass on the patent number, and you wouldn't even know.
And you could become an inadvertent infringer just by doing what farmers have always done, saving the seed. That lack of transparency is terrifying for growers.
Okay, and the final principle.
The final, and maybe the overarching principle, is ethical stewardship of biodiversity. The core belief here is that the primary goal of the entire seed community, growers, breeders, companies, everyone must be to support and maximize genetic diversity. Why? To prepare for the unpredictable challenges of climate chaos.
And IPR strategies that restrict breeding get in the way of that goal.
Fundamentally, any strategy that locks up genetics, that prevents breeders from accessing and using diverse material, limits our collective adaptive possibilities for the future. So the ethical guideline emerging is simple. If a seed was originally obtained from the public commons, then its progeny, its offspring, should remain available for open breeding and further adaptation. Keep the cycle going.
It all really boils down to that idea we touched on earlier, this realization that we need to actively proliferate seeds, share them, use them, adapt them, in order to truly preserve them for the future. So let's try and pull this all together. What does this complex picture mean for the future of our food system? We've really explored this dual nature of the seed, haven't we? It's a naturally evolving organism, but it's also the result of very intentional, often laborious human breeding work.
And the current legal system, particularly the unchecked expansion of utility patents that really took hold after ex parte Hibberd, has clearly enabled an almost frightening concentration of power.
A few huge corporations controlling essential genetic resources.
Exactly. And restricting the ability of public researchers, smaller breeders, and farmers themselves to develop the resilient, adapted varieties we desperately need. It's driven the whole system towards dangerous levels of uniformity and dependency.
But at the same time, we've seen these really powerful, creative grassroots efforts pushing back, using alternative tools like PVPs, trademarks, defensive publications, MTAs, and building these community ethics.
All trying to foster open exchange and protect diversity in different ways. But it's crucial to remember this fight for a resilient food system, it isn't just about community morality or finding clever workarounds. It is fundamentally rooted in policy.
The rules of the game themselves are skewed.
That's right. The good news, perhaps, is that there seems to be some recognition of this institutional problem now, even at the highest levels. You mentioned President Biden's Executive Order 14036, the one on promoting competition.
Right.
Well, that order specifically led to federal agency recommendations looking at IPR and competition in the commercial seed trade. It signaled a potential federal appetite to finally re-examine and maybe address the problems caused by that utility patent overreach from the 1980s.
So policy change could potentially rebalance the power.
It has the potential to redistribute power in a way that bottom-up community efforts, while vital, probably can't achieve on their own. It's about trying to ensure the rules themselves start favoring resilience and adaptation, not just endless corporate consolidation and monopoly.
Which brings us, I think, to the final, really provocative thought that emerges from this whole deep dive.
Which is,
It comes from the organic seed community, that clear-eyed recognition that seeds must be proliferated in order to be preserved.
proliferated, spread widely, used, adapted, not locked away in a vault or a siloed corporate portfolio.
Exactly. Because the secret to humanity's future success, especially in the face of climate change, the vital adaptive traits we're going to need, they might be hidden right now in some obscure, regionally adapted variety. Maybe something people don't even like to grow much today because it doesn't fit the current industrial market demands.
Yeah, the answer might be in something unpopular right now.
So the crucial central mission, the question we all need to grapple with, is how do we define systems that allow us to share those seeds, that genetic diversity, as widely as possible? How do we maximize adaptation, while at the same time finding fair and sustainable ways to support the considerable time, the labor, the financial investment that's required to develop, steward, and keep improving those seeds in the first place?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? How to share widely while sustaining the work.
The ultimate harvest, it seems, depends entirely on how openly and how wisely we decide to share the raw material of life itself. It's definitely a question for all of us to chew on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.